The medical ship Mercy hung in the darkness of space like a silver needle against black fabric. Below it, the planet Vethros Prime glowed with a sickly orange hue. From orbit, you couldn't see the plague ravaging its surface, but everyone on the ship knew what was happening down there. Millions were dying, and nobody knew how to stop it. Nurse Jack Miller stood at the observation window of the quarantine deck, watching the planet rotate slowly beneath him. He'd been in space for 3 years now, working on various relief missions across the galaxy, but this one felt different. This one felt hopeless. Behind him, the automatic doors hissed open. His supervisor, head nurse Catherine Boyd, stepped through carrying a data tablet. Her face looked tired, more tired than Jack had ever seen it. "They're asking for volunteers again," she said quietly. "For the isolation ward. 3rd shift." Jack turned from the window. "How many do we have so far?" "You'd be the first." That surprised him. The Mercy had over 200 medical staff on board. Nobody else. Catherine shook her head. "The Vethrin are, they're not dying quietly, Jack. The other species on our medical team, the Arcturians, the Centauri delegates, even our own psychiatrists, they can't handle what's happening in there. It's not the disease that's breaking people. It's watching them die in such terror." Jack had read the reports. The Vethrin were an insectoid species, tall as humans but with 4 arms and hard chitinous plates covering their bodies. They'd always been described as logical, almost emotionless in their efficiency. They built beautiful hive cities and had developed faster-than-light travel centuries before humans even invented the wheel. They were advanced, peaceful, and now they were dying in a way that went against everything their species had ever known. "I'll do it," Jack said. Catherine nodded slowly, like she'd expected that answer but wished she hadn't gotten it. 3rd shift starts at 2200 hours. I'll have the hazmat protocol sent to your quarters." That night, Jack suited up in the full quarantine gear. The suit was uncomfortable, tight around the joints and hot despite the cooling system. He checked his air supply twice, then made his way through 3 separate decontamination chambers before finally entering the isolation ward. The smell hit him first, even through the suit's filters. It was sweet and chemical, like burning plastic mixed with overripe fruit. That was the Vethrin pheromone system going haywire, their bodies' last attempts at communication as they died. The ward was massive, a converted cargo bay that now held row after row of transparent isolation pods. Each one contained a dying Vethrin. Jack counted 30 visible from where he stood, and he knew there were more in the sections beyond. He approached the first pod slowly. Inside, a Vethrin lay curled in a position that looked painful, all 4 arms wrapped around its thorax. Its antennae twitched erratically. When it sensed Jack's presence, its compound eyes swiveled to look at him. A small speaker on the pod crackled to life with the mechanical voice of the translator. "Alone. I'm alone. Wrong. This is wrong." Jack had been briefed on this. Back on Vethros Prime, when a Vethrin died, it would be surrounded by hundreds of its colony members. They would press close, their antennae touching, and through some combination of pheromones and bioelectric signals, the dying Vethrin would transfer its memories to the living. Everything it had learned, experienced, and understood would be absorbed by the colony. It was how their species evolved, how they passed knowledge through generations without writing or recording. But the plague was too contagious. Quarantine protocols meant each Vethrin died alone, unable to complete the transfer. Their life's memories, their very purpose for existing, died with them. For a species that had never known individual death, only the continuation of the collective, this was more than dying. It was erasure. Jack moved to the next pod, then the next. Every Vethrin showed the same behavior, reaching toward empty air with their 4 arms, mandibles clicking in patterns that the translators struggled to interpret. Most of the translations came out as fragments: incomplete, unfinished, need colony, where are they? One elder Vethrin, larger than the others with faded blue markings on her carapace, managed to focus on Jack as he approached. Her nameplate read Thekra, Colony Elder, 47 cycles. "Human," her translator said. "You, stay?" Jack moved closer to the pod. "I'm here. I'm staying my whole shift." Afraid, Thekra admitted, and something in Jack's chest tightened. A species that had never known fear was learning it in their final moments. "We die wrong. Memories lost. Colony forgets us. We become nothing." Jack wished he could reach through the pod and hold her hand, or whatever gesture of comfort her species would understand. But the quarantine glass stayed between them, cold and necessary and cruel. "I'm sorry," he said, knowing it wasn't enough. "I'm so sorry." He spent the next 8 hours moving between pods, doing what little he could. Adjusting medications that only eased physical pain while doing nothing for the existential terror. Recording final messages that would never be received the way they were meant to be. Watching as, one by one, the Vethrans stopped moving, their antennae fell still, and the lights on their pods shifted from green to red. Jack's third night in the isolation ward felt heavier than the first two. Maybe it was the exhaustion seeping into his bones, or maybe it was the weight of watching so many die in fear. He'd lost count of how many Vethran had passed during his shifts. 20? 30? Each one reaching for something that wasn't there, each one terrified of becoming nothing. Thekra was still alive, though barely. Her vital signs had been declining steadily, and the medical AI predicted she had maybe 6 hours left. Jack found himself spending more time at her pod than the others. Maybe because she'd been the first to really talk to him, or maybe because something in her eyes reminded him of his own grandmother in her final days. He pulled up a chair next to her isolation pod. The metal was cold even through his suit. Thekra's antennae twitched weakly in his direction. Human Jack, her translator crackled. The voice was getting fainter now, the software struggling to interpret her weakening pheromone signals. You return. Why? It's my shift, Jack said simply. And I wanted to check on you. Check. The word seemed to confuse her translator for a moment. You care? About individual? Not colony? Jack smiled, though he knew she probably couldn't interpret the gesture. Yeah. Humans do that. We care about individuals. Thekra's breathing apparatus made a sound like wind through hollow reeds. Strange. Beautiful. Lonely way to live. They sat in silence for a while. Around them, the ward hummed with the sounds of medical equipment, life support systems, and the occasional click or chirp from other dying Vethran. It was a sterile, mechanical symphony that felt wrong somehow. Cold. Human Jack, Thekra said suddenly, her voice stronger than it had been in hours. Question. Difficult question. Go ahead. Humans? I hear sounds. From recreation areas. Not words. Not data transmission. Something else. She struggled to find the concept. Memory sounds? That exist, separate from chemical signals. Jack thought for a moment, then understood. Music. You mean music? Singing. Yes. This. Music. Thekra's forearms moved slightly, a gesture Jack had learned meant contemplation. We Vethran, we share memory through touch, through pheromones. But humans, you create memory sounds that travel through air? That exist independent. I guess that's one way to describe it, Jack said. He'd never really thought about music that way before. Thekra's antennae drooped. I die soon. Hours, maybe less. I die in silence. In emptiness. No colony touch. No memory transfer. Just machine sounds and fear. She paused, and when her translator spoke again, it was so quiet Jack almost missed it. Could you make memory sounds? For me? So I not die in only silence. The request caught Jack completely off guard. Sing? To a dying alien? He hadn't sung in years, not since his mom passed away. He'd sung at her funeral, barely made it through one verse before his voice broke. I'm not really a singer, he said awkwardly. Please. The translator somehow managed to convey desperate hope in that single word. Want to die hearing something beautiful. Something not machines. Jack looked at Thekra's dying form, curled and alone in her transparent prison. What did he have to lose? His dignity? That seemed pretty insignificant compared to her fear. Okay, he said softly. Okay, I'll try. He thought for a moment about what to sing. His mind went back to childhood, to his mother tucking him in at night. She used to sing an old folk song, something her mother had taught her. Jack couldn't remember all the words, but he remembered the melody. He started singing, his voice rough and uncertain at first. Hush little baby, don't say a word, Mama's gonna buy you a mockingbird. The effect was immediate and startling. Thekra's entire body seemed to relax. The frantic clicking of her mandibles stopped. Her antennae, which had been twitching erratically, suddenly aligned toward Jack and held steady. Her vital signs on the monitor, which had been spiking with stress hormones, began to stabilize. Not improving exactly, but calming. The chaotic readings smoothed into gentler waves. Jack kept singing, gaining confidence. And if that mockingbird don't sing, Mama's gonna buy you a diamond ring. Something else was happening too. Around the ward, other Vethran were responding. Jack could see them in his peripheral vision, turning in their pods, their antennae all swiveling to point in his direction. The constant background noise of their distress, the clicks and chirps and chemical alarm signals, began to fade. The isolation ward, for the first time since Jack had started working there, grew quiet except for his voice. He finished the lullaby, his voice trailing off on the final note. For a moment, there was complete silence. Then Thekra's translator spoke, stronger than before. Again. Please. More memory sounds. Jack sang another song, then another. He went through every tune he could remember from childhood. Camp songs, church hymns, pop songs from the radio, half-remembered commercial jingles. His voice cracked on the high notes and he forgot half the lyrics, but it didn't seem to matter. Thekra's eyes stayed focused on him the entire time. And around the ward, 30 dying veteran lay still and calm, listening. After nearly an hour of singing, Jack's throat was getting raw. He finished a slow, sad melody his father used to play on guitar and looked at Thekra. Her vital signs were dropping now, approaching the final threshold. But there was no fear in her posture anymore. No frantic reaching. She looked peaceful. Thank you, her translator whispered. I hear beauty. I die, not in silence. Not in fear. Jack felt tears welling up behind his helmet faceplate. You're welcome. Human Jack, promise. Anything. When I gone. Thekra's breathing slowed. Sing for others? They afraid too. They need memory sounds. Need to die with beauty. Jack nodded, his throat too tight to speak. Thekra's antennae dipped once, a gesture Jack had learned meant gratitude or farewell. Then her eyes dimmed, her breathing stopped, and the monitor flatlined with a single sustained tone. But she died calm. She died hearing something beautiful. As Jack sat there, staring at her still form, he became aware of something else. Every other veteran in the ward was looking at him. Waiting. Their translators began speaking almost in unison, dozens of voices overlapping. Please. Sing to us too. Jack took a shaky breath and started singing again. Word spread through the medical ship faster than Jack expected. By his fourth shift, dying veteran weren't just accepting his presence, they were requesting him specifically. Their colony leaders, the few healthy ones still coordinating relief efforts from orbit, had started asking the Mercer's command staff if the singing human could visit certain patients. Jack found himself working double shifts, sometimes triple. He'd stumble back to his quarters at dawn with his voice barely functioning, sleep for a few hours, then return to the isolation ward. Catherine kept telling him to rest, that he was going to burn out, but Jack couldn't stop. Not when he saw the difference it made. He sang everything he could think of. Country songs his dad played on road trips. Rock ballads from high school. The wedding song from his sister's marriage. Even silly birthday tunes and commercial jingles. The veteran didn't seem to care about the quality or the content. It was the sound itself, the human voice creating melody, that calmed them. But something else was happening too, something the medical staff couldn't explain. Dr. Rebecca Walsh, the ship's physicist, started showing up during Jack's singing sessions with handheld scanners and tablets covered in data. She was a small woman with graying hair always tied back in a practical bun, and she had the intense focus of someone who'd stumbled onto something impossible. Look at this, she told Jack during a break between songs, shoving a tablet in his face. The screen showed waves and particles dancing in patterns Jack couldn't begin to understand. These readings are from the isolation ward during your last shift. See these fluctuations? Jack squinted at the screen. I have no idea what I'm looking at. Exactly. Neither do I. Neither does anyone. Rebecca's eyes were bright with excitement and confusion. These are quantum fluctuations appearing in local spacetime whenever you sing. They don't match any known particle signature. They shouldn't exist at all, but they do. Is that dangerous? I don't know. Maybe. Probably not. The point is, your voice is doing something to reality itself. She pulled up another screen. And look at this, the veteran brain scans during your singing. Their neural activity synchronizes. All of them, across the entire ward, their consciousness patterns align into one coherent wave. Jack felt a chill run down his spine. What does that mean? I think, Rebecca said slowly, choosing her words carefully, that human vocal music might be interacting with their pheromone-based consciousness in ways we never imagined possible. The veteran transfer memories through bioelectric and chemical signals, right? Well, those signals exist on quantum frequencies. And somehow, impossibly, your singing is resonating on those same frequencies. She looked at Jack like he'd grown a second head. You're not just comforting them, Jack. You're connecting with them on a level that goes beyond physical reality. Jack didn't know what to say to that. He was just a nurse who sang to dying patients. Nothing special. That night, his fifth consecutive shift, Jack sat with a young veteran warrior named Kethvan. He was barely into adulthood by veteran standards, wounded in one of the evacuation efforts and infected with the plague. His carapace still showed the bright green markings of youth. My colony, Kethvan's translator said weakly. Cannot feel them. Cannot find them. Am I already dead? Is this the void? You're not dead, Jack assured him. You're here with me. You're not alone. But I am. I am alone. First time in existence. Don't know how to be individual. Jack understood. The veteran weren't just physically isolated. Their entire consciousness was wired for collective experience. Being cut off was like cutting off a human's ability to think. Let me sing for you, Jack said gently. Would that help? Kethvan's antennae perked up slightly. Yes. Please. The memory sounds. They feel like colony. Like connection. Jack started with a slow, mournful song. Something old, something with weight in history. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound, that saved a wretch like me. He was halfway through the second verse when the air began to change. At first, Jack thought it was his exhaustion playing tricks on him. A shimmer in the corner of his vision, like heat waves rising from summer asphalt. But when he blinked, it didn't go away. It grew stronger. The space around Kethvan's isolation pod began to ripple. Colors that Jack didn't have names for bled through the air like watercolor paint on wet paper. And then, slowly, shapes began to form. They were translucent, barely visible, like looking through frosted glass. But they had the unmistakable silhouette of veteran. 4 arms, tall bodies, antennae reaching upward. There were 3 of them, hovering around Kethvan's pod. Jack's voice faltered, the song dying in his throat. Kethvan's entire body went rigid. His translator exploded with sound. Ancestors. The ancestors. Mother. Mother, you're here. How? How are you here? One of the translucent figures reached toward the pod. Where its hand touched the glass, light rippled outward in concentric circles. Kethvan pressed his own hands against the glass from the inside, matching the gesture. Jack could see energy flowing between them now, visible currents of something that looked like lightning mixed with northern lights. Blues and greens and colors that hurt to look at directly. The other 2 figures joined in, their hands touching the pod's surface, and the energy intensified. Around the ward, alarms started going off. Other veteran were reacting to something, their vital signs spiking not with distress but with what looked like excitement. Jack turned slowly and felt his heart stop. There were dozens of them now. Hundreds maybe. Translucent veteran figures filling the isolation ward, each one hovering near a pod. The dead, somehow present among the dying. Ancestral spirits that, according to everything Jack knew about science and reality, shouldn't exist. But they were there. Rebecca came running into the ward, her scanner screaming with alerts. She stopped dead in her tracks when she saw the figures. My God, she whispered. Jack, what did you do? I just sang, Jack said, his voice shaking. I was just singing. Kethvan's translator was still chattering. The transfer, it's happening. They're taking my memories. The colony will remember me. I won't be erased. I won't be nothing. The young warrior's body began to relax, the tension leaving him as the energy transfer completed. The translucent figures grew brighter for a moment, absorbing something essential from Kethvan. Then, gently, he stopped breathing. But there was no fear in his final moment. Only peace. The ancestral spirits remained visible for a few seconds longer, then began to fade like morning mist. Within moments, they were gone completely, leaving only the normal sterile environment of the isolation ward. Jack stood frozen, his mind trying to process what he'd just witnessed. Around him, every dying veteran was making the same sounds, the same gestures. They'd all seen it. They'd all felt their ancestors' presence. Rebecca grabbed his arm. Jack, I need you to sing again. Right now. I need to record this properly. I can't. Jack, please. You just opened a doorway between dimensions. You just proved that consciousness survives death. Do you understand what this means? Jack looked at the other dying veteran, all of them watching him with desperate hope in their compound eyes. They'd seen their dead return, even if only for moments. They'd seen proof that they wouldn't be erased. His throat was raw and his whole body shook with exhaustion and shock, but Jack took a breath and started singing again. The Mercy turned into a research station overnight. Scientists from every department crammed into observation rooms overlooking the isolation ward, watching Jack sing to dying veteran while their instruments went haywire with impossible readings. The ancestral spirits appeared every single time now, growing clearer and more stable with each session. Dr. Rebecca Walsh barely slept anymore. Her team worked around the clock trying to understand what was happening. On the third day after the first spirit appearance, she called Jack into her lab. He came straight from a 6-hour shift, his voice almost gone, surviving on lozenges and warm tea. "We figured it out," Rebecca said, gesturing to a holographic display floating above her desk. "Well, partially figured it out. We understand the mechanics even if we don't understand the why." The display showed 2 wave patterns, one labeled human vocal harmonics and another labeled veteran consciousness frequency. As Jack watched, the waves began to overlap and synchronize. "When veteran die," Rebecca explained, "their consciousness doesn't just stop. It transitions to a different quantum state, a different dimensional frequency. That's how they've always shared memories, they exist partially in both states during the transfer process. But the quarantine created a barrier. The dying couldn't reach across to find their ancestors, and the ancestors couldn't reach back." She manipulated the display, and the waves began to connect, forming bridges between them. Human vocal music, specifically singing, creates standing wave patterns that somehow match those quantum frequencies perfectly. "You're not just making sound, Jack. You're building bridges between dimensions. Your voice is the anchor that lets the dead partially manifest in our reality." Jack stared at the display, trying to wrap his exhausted brain around the concept. "But why humans? Why our voices?" "We don't know. Maybe it's something in the harmonic complexity of human speech. Maybe it's tied to how our brains process music and emotion. Maybe it's just random chance that we evolved something that happens to resonate with veteran death frequencies." Rebecca shrugged. "But the fact is, no other species we've tested can do this. We tried recordings of Arcturian whale songs, Centauri instrumental music, even computer-generated tones. Nothing works except human voices, specifically human singing." A younger scientist, Dr. Paul Chen, spoke up from his workstation. "We think humans have been tapping into dimensional harmonics through music for thousands of years. All those stories about songs that could raise the dead, or music that could touch the soul. Maybe they weren't just metaphors." Jack felt something cold settle in his stomach. "So what does this mean? I just keep singing until the plague runs its course." "That's the problem," Rebecca said quietly. "Jack, you've been singing for 18 hours a day for almost a week. Your vocal cords are showing signs of permanent damage. If you keep this up, you're going to lose your voice completely. Maybe forever." Jack had known his throat was getting worse, but hearing it stated so bluntly made it real. He touched his neck unconsciously. "And there's another issue," Paul added, pulling up a star map. "The plague isn't just on this ship. There are hundreds of thousands of veteran dying on the planet below. Millions more in colonies across their system. They are all dying alone, all terrified, and none of them can complete their death rites because we can't break quarantine." The weight of it pressed down on Jack like a physical force. He was one person with one voice, and it was already failing. How could he possibly help everyone who needed it? "We've been broadcasting recordings of your singing," Rebecca said. "But it doesn't work. The dimensional bridge only forms when you're actively singing, in the moment. Something about live human vocalization is necessary. A recording is just dead sound." Jack slumped into a chair. Around him, the scientists looked at him with a mixture of sympathy and desperate hope. They'd figured out what he could do, but not how to scale it up. Not how to save more than the few dozen veteran in the isolation ward. "There has to be something," Jack said hoarsely. "Some way to help more of them." Rebecca and Paul exchanged looks. "There might be," Rebecca said carefully. "But you're not going to like it." She pulled up another display, this one showing audio wave analysis. "Your voice creates the bridge, but it's not the only thing. The bridge strengthens based on harmonic complexity. Multiple voices singing together create stronger, wider bridges than one voice alone." Jack understood immediately. "You want more humans to sing." "Not just more. We need a lot more. Dozens, maybe hundreds." Paul zoomed out the star map, showing Vethros Prime rotating below them. "If we could get enough humans singing simultaneously, we might be able to create a resonance field large enough to cover the entire planet. Every dying veteran could reach their ancestors, complete their death rites, die in peace. But would need to coordinate it perfectly," Rebecca added. And we'd need humans who are willing to sing, continuously, for hours. It's asking a lot. Jack thought about Thekra, dying in terror before he sang to her. He thought about Kethvan, seeing his mother's spirit and finding peace. He thought about the thousands of Vethran down on the planet, reaching for ancestors they couldn't feel, terrified of becoming nothing. How many humans are on this ship? He asked. About 400 crew and passengers total, Paul said. And how many of them know what I've been doing? Everyone, probably. Word spreads fast on a ship this size. Jack stood up, ignoring the protest from his exhausted muscles. Then let's ask them. Let's ask all of them if they'll help. Catherine found him an hour later in the ship's mess hall. Jack was standing on a table, his voice barely above a whisper as he tried to explain the situation to a growing crowd of crew members. I know it sounds crazy, he was saying. I know none of this makes sense. But I've seen it with my own eyes. When we sing, their dead come back. Just for a moment, just long enough, but it's real. They die in peace instead of terror. And there are millions more down there who need the same thing. The crowd murmured among themselves. Jack saw doubt on some faces, curiosity on others, and on a few, determination. A maintenance technician named Ryan Brooks spoke up. I can't sing worth a damn, but I'll try if it helps. Same here, said pilot Jessica Martinez. My voice could crack glass, but if it means something. More voices joined in, volunteers stepping forward. Engineers, medical staff, cargo handlers, even the ship's cook. One by one, they committed to trying. Captain Tom Harrison pushed through the crowd, his weathered face serious. You're asking my crew to participate in something we barely understand. Something that could be dangerous. Yes, sir, Jack said honestly. I am. The captain studied him for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he smiled. My grandfather always said that humans were put in this universe to build bridges. Never thought he meant it literally. He turned to address the crowd. Anyone who volunteers will be granted whatever accommodations they need. This is voluntary, but it's also important. We're going to help these people die with dignity. Over the next 12 hours, the Mercy became a giant rehearsal hall. Scientists worked with volunteers, teaching them simple songs and melodies. It didn't matter what they sang, Rebecca explained, only that they sang together and meant it. Jack moved through the groups, his ruined voice barely able to demonstrate, but offering encouragement where he could. He saw fear on some faces, excitement on others. These were people who'd signed up to save lives, and now they were being asked to ease death instead. It wasn't what anyone expected, but they were stepping up anyway. As night fell over the medical ship, 400 human voices prepared to sing bridges between the living and the dead. The plan was simple in theory, impossible in practice. Every human on the Mercy would sing simultaneously while their voices were broadcast on every frequency down to Vethros Prime. The scientists hoped the combined harmonic resonance would create a dimensional bridge wide enough to cover the entire planet. Jack stood in the ship's main assembly hall, looking at the faces of 400 humans who'd volunteered for something they barely understood. There were nurses like him, engineers with grease-stained uniforms, pilots still wearing their flight suits, scientists clutching data tablets, and even the 70-year-old head cook from the galley. Every single person looked nervous. Captain Harrison stood at the front, his voice carried by speakers throughout the ship. I won't lie to you. We don't know if this will work. We don't know if it's safe. What we do know is that millions of people are dying in fear down there, and we have a chance to help them. That's enough for me. He looked at Jack and nodded. Jack stepped forward, his throat aching even before he started. The medical team had given him injections to reduce the swelling in his vocal cords, but they'd warned him this might be the last time he ever sang. After today, his voice might be gone forever. He decided it was worth it. We're going to start with something simple, Jack said, his raspy voice barely carrying. Something everyone knows. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't even have to be good. It just has to be honest. Sing like you mean it. Rebecca gave him a thumbs up from her monitoring station. All her instruments were ready, recording everything. The broadcast system was primed to carry their voices down to the planet's surface. Jack raised his hand, counted down from 3 with his fingers, and began. His voice cracked on the first note, but he pushed through. Around him, 400 voices joined in, uncertain at first. Some were off-key, some were barely audible, but they were trying. The sound built slowly, voices finding each other, harmonizing accidentally and then intentionally. The effect was immediate. Every monitor in Rebecca's station lit up with alerts. The quantum fluctuations that appeared when Jack sang alone were now amplified 100-fold. Reality itself seemed to shudder around the ship. In the isolation ward below, the ancestral spirits appeared instantly, brighter and more solid than ever before. But they weren't just in the ward anymore. Translucent veteran figures materialized in the corridors, in the cargo bays, in every space of the ship. They moved through walls like they didn't exist, drawn to the living members of their species. Down on Vethros Prime, in a quarantine hospital on the edge of the capital city, a dying veteran named Schultes lay alone in a sealed room. She'd been preparing herself for erasure, for becoming nothing, when suddenly the air around her began to shimmer. Her father appeared first, dead for 20 cycles but somehow present. Then her siblings, her mentors, her childhood friends. They surrounded her bed, their hands reaching out, and she felt the connection she'd thought was lost forever. The memory transfer began, and Schultes wept with relief. Across the planet, the same scene repeated millions of times. In hospitals and homes, in bunkers and isolation facilities, dying veterans suddenly found themselves surrounded by their ancestors. The dimensional bridge stretched across the entire world, powered by human voices singing from orbit. Back on the Mercy, Jack could barely keep singing. His throat felt like it was tearing, each note was agony, but he couldn't stop. Not when he could see the difference it was making on the monitors showing the planet below. Ryan Brooks, the maintenance tech who'd said he couldn't sing, stood next to Jack with tears streaming down his face, singing louder than anyone. Jessica Martinez, the pilot, had her eyes closed and was pouring her whole heart into the melody. The ship's cook was holding hands with a young cargo handler, both of them singing through their own tears. They weren't professional singers. They weren't trained musicians. They were just humans doing what humans had always done best, using their voices to connect, to comfort, to bridge the gaps between souls. The singing went on for 2 hours. Some voices dropped out from exhaustion, then rejoined. Others never wavered. Jack's voice gave out completely after 90 minutes, but by then it didn't matter. The bridge was stable, held up by hundreds of other voices. Captain Harrison, singing a deep bass harmony in the corner, watched his crew with obvious pride. These people had signed up to explore space, to heal the sick, to maintain engines and cook meals. None of them had expected to become shepherds for the dying. But they'd stepped up anyway. When Rebecca finally gave the signal that the plague's death toll had dropped to near zero, that almost every dying veteran had completed their rites, the singing slowly faded. 400 exhausted humans collapsed into chairs, onto floors, leaning against walls. Many were crying. Some were laughing. Most were just stunned by what they'd accomplished. Jack sat on the floor, his back against the wall, unable to speak at all now. Catherine knelt beside him, checking his throat with a medical scanner. "You did it," she said softly. "You magnificent idiot, you actually did it." 3 days later, the Veteran High Council requested a formal meeting with the crew of the Mercy. Jack stood in the communication room, his throat bandaged, while a holographic projection of 5 veteran elders materialized before them. The lead elder, ancient and scarred from centuries of life, spoke through the translator with unusual emotion. "Humans of the ship Mercy, we have studied your species since first contact. We knew you were different, chaotic where we are ordered, individual where we are collective. But we never understood the depth of that difference until now." The elder gestured with all 4 arms, a sign of deep respect. "In our millions of years of existence, across thousands of species encountered, we have seen many forms of intelligence. We have seen species stronger, faster, more logical than yourselves. But we have never encountered a species that could sing bridges between the living and the dead." Captain Harrison stood straighter. "We're just glad we could help." "Help," the elder repeated. An insufficient word. "You gave millions of our people peace in their final moments. You allowed them to die as veterans should die, complete and remembered. You shepherded souls across the void." The elder paused, conferring with the others in rapid pheromone bursts that the translator didn't bother interpreting. Then they turned back. "The council has voted unanimously. Humanity will be given a new designation in our historical records. You are no longer simply humans to us. You are Shulvethkar. In your language, the closest translation is the shepherds of souls." Jack felt something warm spread through his chest despite his pain. Around him, the crew stood silent, taking in the weight of what they'd just been given. A name. Recognition. Proof that sometimes the most human thing you could do, singing to comfort the dying, could matter on a cosmic scale. Later, in the medical bay, Rebecca visited Jack while he recovered. The doctor said his voice would eventually return, though it would never be quite the same. The Vethrin are spreading the story through every network they have, Rebecca told him. Every species in the galactic community is going to hear about what happened here. About what human voices can do. Jack managed a weak smile and wrote on a tablet since he couldn't speak, "Does this mean I'm famous?" "You're all famous. Every human who sang." Rebecca sat on the edge of his bed. "But more importantly, you changed how the galaxy sees us. We're not just the new species anymore. We're the ones who can touch the space between life and death." Jack thought about Thekra, about Kethvan, about millions of Vethrin who died afraid until humans sang them home. He thought about his crew, 400 ordinary people who'd become extraordinary when it mattered. He wrote, "We just did what humans do. We sang."